Exceptional Radio. Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Wow, that was random. Exceptional Radio. Good afternoon. It's the 11th of October, and I've been spending a little bit of extra time away from Facebook lately, and I just want to say my stress levels are at an all-time low. It's actually quite incredible. I am not incensed by, the latest, I'm not even sure what to call these things anymore. Travesty? Whatever crazy shit's going on, it's not causing my blood to boil.
Yeah, man, I deactivated my account, and it's like there's no... Twitter has some sort of antagonism, but my internet experience is conflict-free as almost now, because, I have the T word muted on Twitter, which is a fantastic feature.
That's such a great feature.
When you can mute words, once I muted the T word, Twitter became so much better, because it's like, whether it's somebody who's Democrat or Republican arguing about it, that shit just don't come up.
Yeah.
Like, this tweet includes the word you muted. Oh shit, I ain't gotta see it.
What's funny is so Facebook goes through all these changes to their layout, the design, and I feel like a lot of time what they're really doing behind the scenes is figuring out ways to circumvent browser extensions which inhibit the presentation of certain features of Facebook. And so for a while I had this blacklist extension which wouldn't even show posts that had certain words in it. And then that thing broke. And then I found another one that hid anything that was sponsored. And then that broke. And then I found another one that cut the volume of HTML5 video to like 50%. And then that broke. And then they made it worse, where anytime a video starts, not only is it at full volume, but the volume slider doesn't do anything until you get to the bottom 5% of the slider. So I can't even watch a video on Facebook without getting blown out of my seat. And it's not because I'm blasting music. It's because they're running their audio at full blast. And it makes no sense. So that's stressful as fuck. And so when the big sandbox that everyone goes to hang out in there are elements that aren't inviting. It's like if the slides were cheese graters and they still expect us to use them.
Oof. Yeah. I think a lot of people do still end up using them because they aren't emboldened or empowered to realize that you don't have to slide down that cheese grater.
Yeah.
And they're like, it's the fucking mouse that's stuck between an electrified fence and or an electrified land and drowning, and they end up just like giving up and drowning. I don't know if you've heard of that study, but it's like, obviously it's fucked up, but it's this thing where if mammals are stuck between two options that have no positive outcome, a lot of them just give up.
Wow.
And it's like this, obviously we talk about manufactured consent frequently, but this is scientifically proven that mammals will have a point where they just give up and just drown if there's no viable option. And this is like on an animal, like a pure animal level.
Yeah. So for the computer user, the internet denizen who uses Facebook as their primary means of interaction, that's all they're going to see.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause Facebook makes it pretty hard to get out of their sandbox. Everyone you know is there. All the things that you want to talk about are already there. All those groups. I was talking to one of my buddies about it, and he said that, I mean, he agreed. He's like, it's just ads and arguing, and he's gonna keep it though because he's part of a few music groups where he's still able to find new music, good, new, exciting music, and so it might not be completely lost. And there are some international, not sure how to describe them, voices that are purposing the platform as a way to engage in a different type of dialogue, but it's not an American
See,
dialogue. It's something
that,
else.
that's addiction talking, and I thought about this for many days, and when somebody says that, they are addicted to the platform and not the content, and they're using the content as an excuse to stay on the platform.
Yeah.
Because what ends up happening is Facebook didn't produce that music.
Nope.
That music that he's talking about, Facebook didn't make that. And it's obvious that he could find it somewhere else. It's just a matter of Facebook makes it easier. So this is the whole problem, is that Facebook has facilitated all these different aspects of socializing, and that's how they stay in that point, because it's like it makes it easy to stay in touch with people in ways where you're like, oh, I guess I could just text this person. But if you don't have that person's number, then you have to go through this whole thing of like, oh shit, I was able to get in touch with. So then you realize Facebook gives you a level of access socially that you're not supposed to have to all these different people. You're not supposed to be able to just message people. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean,
Like,
what did we do? We created a Discord server, and then we let people know, hey, this is where you can find us if you want to talk on the
yeah.
regular. So
People think that they act like Facebook is the only option. And I think that's why they stick with it for so long.
yeah,
I think Facebook presents itself in a way that almost fools people into thinking that it's the only option for staying in touch, or maybe even just being overexposed to information about other people and seeing even the most base and crude thoughts that people just seem to have in a fleeting moment, put on display for everybody to see and give their own fleeting, base, crude reactions in the form of an emoji to whatever it is that they're putting up. There are some that it doesn't have to be the only platform where really great, positive, encouraging things are shared. I think that there should be another way to do that.
well, I think YouTube is actually where I find almost all of the music that I've enjoyed over the past decade or more at this point. And aside from the lack of quality interaction, because the comments are just a hellhole, but the music is still good. The music is actually the reason I'm still using that platform. There are more options, and it's about finding new content, really. I think you're right, though. I think that it's the illusion. I've always seen Facebook as a really masterfully skinned forum that focuses on the user profile as opposed to the actual threads of that create the forum itself. And then it creates this weird obfuscation layer where it's almost impossible to find old threads. Like, completely impossible. You have to save your own bookmark of an old thread if you want to revisit it in 6 months. And there's no way that somebody is going to randomly stumble upon your 6-month-old thread without going through, a mountain of posts.
Well, Chris mentioned addiction.
Yeah.
And addiction, that's a psychological, neurochemical occurrence. And I think that Facebook has, as you said, skinned itself in a way that generates a certain level of psychological addiction and maybe even physical addiction, depending on, the types of stimuli that are being presented and the substrates that are being used to convey that information.
oh yeah, people are addicted to that blue and white light, man. It's on a physical level, it's on a psychological level. People are addicted to voyeurism, people are addicted to being seen. There's all these things. it's not even just one type of addiction, and that's why it's so dangerous, because it feels innocuous. And it's one of these elements of social media that the people who created it, I mean, obviously there's multiple types, but there's been multiple people who tried to blow whistles on the addiction qualities of these platforms, because they went through focus group testing and painstaking effort to make sure that these platforms are addictive. So it's not this thing that, oh, it happened on accident. Like, no, they intentionally made these platforms addictive, down to when Instagram took away the visible likes and how many likes were happening on each image. People damn near revolted. And you had people having public mental breakdowns about not being able to see their likes anymore. They put a bunch of, I mean, it really happened. There was videos of people basically going into physical shock from being taken off of likes cold turkey. And it's like, it's crazy to say it like that, but that shit actually happened. And they want to act like that didn't happen. But we're at this period where, again, people are also addicted to feeling informed, because there's this element of like, oh, if I update my feed, I know what's happening. I know what's happening in my local area. I know what's happening in the rest of the world. I know what's happening in the White House. I know what's happening in Portland. Oh, look at this. I have 5 feeds open at once. I got 27 tabs. I'm watching 5 live feeds, and I know what's happening everywhere. Thanks, Facebook. And then that person ends up not knowing anything, because they're just so overloaded with information that they can't. And then they become QAnon, the QAnon junkie. And this is kind of where
Yeah, because all those things are connected. They're all related to each other, because I'm watching it through Facebook.
Man, and this is where people's brains are not meant to handle this much information. And when we're bombarded with this much information, we're trying to make sense of it in a way that is completely scatterbrained and downright dangerous, when there's somebody who's able to manipulate disconnected things into making them look connected.
You're absolutely right. And not only is it the volume, I think it's the packaging. The packaging of the information is done in such a way that people aren't actively paying attention to who is presenting them with the information. They're taking it at face value en masse. So that's where we get a lot of this susceptibility to confirmation bias, susceptibility to manufactured consent, and any other kind of information or confirmation biases relating to the things that they're most likely to look at, because they end up trusting these unverified sources as the truth.
God, if only Facebook had a way to, filter what was real and what wasn't.
Yeah, because then who would be deciding that?
Yeah, well, that's the other problem. Can't let the masses, can't you let the user base vote on what's real or not? Because we know that
Right.
we know the outcome from that's just a disaster.
Evolution would go away overnight.
I mean, hasn't it? It kind of already has.
Yeah, right.
So who are the gatekeepers for trustworthy, factual information? Like, because I understand, you have scientific medical journals, peer review. However, in terms of mass media consumption, we've looked at the reliability index, I think, in the past, or the bias.
Oh yeah, the media bias.
The media bias scale. So who are the gatekeepers that are releasing information into our general environments?
I mean, Associated Press, a lot of it. They control a lot of the narrative, because then you have it's like there's a line of information distribution through the newspapers, and then through, I forget the name of it, through there's one for radio, and then there's one for television, but Associated Press puts out media on all three. So then what ends up happening is Associated Press runs a narrative, and then rest of the media runs spin for the news cycles have gotten shorter and shorter. So
That's
it's
a
basically,
huge problem.
yeah,
There's just not enough time to verify information, and next thing you know, there's enough information out there that someone's going to run with it, and everyone reads enough that they believe that they're informed. But I think I think that what the pandemic has demonstrated is that our quick news cycle is deeply flawed. And like it's clear to me now that this run and gun rapid fire, you know, delivery of information is actually as problematic as it can possibly be, because everyone wants to be first. We're back to this whole, notion of got to be first, which I feel like we almost harp on at some points because it's so problematic.
Well, it's problematic because it comes at a price.
Yeah.
And the price is reliability, the price is bias, and the price is essentially the negative outcomes of the shift in public perception based off of this rapid fire model.
dude, Associated Press is 174 years old. I had no idea it was that old. So they got started to streamline costs during the Mexican American War of transmitting news. That's how that it was literally founded to make transmitting news during wartime cheaper. So that's literal propaganda, and they want to pass themselves off as neutral. Which again, that's funny that premise that such a thing as objective news even exists. I don't even know if that's philosophically possible. Because even in the context of the BBC, where they have the state sponsored but not necessarily directly state owned news, it is still like a questionable level of objectivity. I don't know it. I'm not the only one, but it's philosophically debatable whether true objectivity is even attainable. So when organizations try to pass themselves off as objective, that shit is questionable right out the gate. But then when other people claim that they're objective, when there's no philosophical agreement on whether objectivity is even possible, then it's questionable, man. And in the sense of like,
Yeah, isn't objectivity this theoretical space that exists between two or more subjective experiences being shared?
Exactly. So knowing that, if you're trying to say you're objective in the context of a civilization that has come to the conclusion that we have no conclusion on whether objectivity is possible yet, it's very disingenuous to say that they're objective, and it's dumbing down the level of discourse by feigning objectivity and feigning lack of bias, and then creating a population that believes in unbiased news. And that's how we get people, oh, Walter Cronkite. Man, it was propaganda when Walter Cronkite was fucking doing that shit too. So
is the AP nonprofit?
Yes.
Theoretically.
So, but all nonprofits in America still have profit motives. So that's double speak.
Let's not pretend that the administration of a nonprofit organization doesn't get paid. They get paid.
Yeah, new speak and double think, because they have to keep creating money to exist. So it's not like people in America hear nonprofit and they don't understand how these things work on purpose, because a lot of generational wealth has been hidden in nonprofit agencies because they get taxed less. So over time, when you had like inheritance tax being very high on some, like they just recently increased I think it's like to 5 million when they start taxing like heavy. But when they had the inheritance taxes very high, that people were just hiding their money in nonprofits and foundations. So this is something that Americans are actively made to not understand, because that's where a lot of the stolen hidden wealth is actually stored, and it's not stored in bank accounts. It's in nonprofits.
It's in the Mellon Foundation.
Yep. Carnegie Mellon Foundations and Rockefeller and any robber baron that created a foundation to quote unquote give back through nonprofit is just a front to store their family's wealth without the government stealing it.
Let me make a shit ton of money through imperialism and capitalism, and then I'm going to trickle some back into my community, but only just enough to make it look like I'm being helpful. That's what I just heard.
Yep. That's exactly
That's
how
some colonialism, right? In full effect. Yep. It's localized colonialism, though. That's like even worse.
It sure is. And then this is how people end up creating these narratives that they're doing well for the community when in fact they're just gentrifying slowly over generations. It becomes like generational gentrification in a way that you can't directly track it to one person, but it's like, oh, their grandfather is the one that basically drove out all the black people and all the non-white people and created a system that made it a haven for this white group to then develop their racist attitudes towards people they've never been around because they were employed by a white man that made it actively whiter, so that then they thought, oh, white people can do everything better. There's this whole structure of how white industry was created to then make other non-white industry look bad, but then also put those industries' products in the minorities' neighborhoods. And it didn't necessarily work in every minority neighborhood. So that's kind of where you get these, like, you know, ethnically arranged city populations. And this is something where it's like geographically, ethnically arranged.
I think you just described California.
It's in like almost every city or every state, man. It's not just California.
I know, but I feel like you really described California in a lot of ways, where a significant portions of the state were built by ethnic populations, and then in the late 1800s, the United States passed legislation which barred immigrants and people of ethnicity from owning property, and so that property was just claimed by banks, because these people couldn't pay on their loans, their mortgages, and then those properties were sold off at auctions at low prices, and then people, they moved in and tried to run those businesses, and a lot of them failed because they didn't know how to run those businesses because they didn't build them.
They don't teach Americans about the Homestead Act.
No.
Because then you can't rail against communism when you know what the Homestead Act is, and that's kind of where it's like. Further, you can't deny white privilege when you know about the Homestead Act, because the non-white people that took part in it had their shit taken away. So it's like, yeah, there's a whole lot of shit that historically, when you learn about it, then you can't deny certain things about why America has to reconcile with its history, and can't just act as if this economy popped up in a vacuum and didn't have anything to do with Native American genocide or land theft or slavery or, exploiting Chinese and Irish populations. Like,
in conjunction with massive love affairs with wealthy people.
Right. Oh, man. Yeah. And then on top of that, trying to reframe Christianity as if it has something to do with being wealthy. So then people tie the church with like material wealth, as if being blessed, is then proven um, by prosperity in a patriarchal wealth system. Because then, this is what's funny to me is the only way you can get a pseudo Christian patriarchy is with the original sin being the focus of the story, and then on top of that, just completely writing Mary's part out of importance, which is why then they turn, like, Americans try to turn around and make Catholicism look like a cult, which it is, but that's for different reasons. Um, they specifically harp on its cult status because of Mary's importance in Catholicism. So it's like I'm not definitely not a supporter of Catholicism because it's a horrible institution. But the funny thing about it is the only good things about it in making Mary important in the mythos is why American Christianity hates it. Like, the American Christianity doesn't hate it for the actual bad things that Catholicism does, which is the fucked up thing. They don't care about all the horrible things that the Catholic Church actually does. They only care about Mary being important because then that undermines the patriarchy completely. Mary can't be important.
Meanwhile, we need to save Muslim women from their Muslim men.
Wait, get Yasi over here and get her to
She
say
was
that.
saying, meanwhile, we need to save women from the Muslim men. It's like this whole bullshit narrative about how what we're doing is about women's liberation. Meanwhile, women didn't actually earn the right to vote. Well, earn what
Acquire.
they didn't. No, they didn't tear down the patriarchy to get their right to vote until the early 1900s. Meanwhile, black men got their right to vote in the late 1800s. And it's like this whole disconnected thing about how we don't get the story told to us correctly in America, because if you realize that black men got the right to vote before all women, then it makes you question the narrative that we've been given as if equality somehow hit when slaves, aka only black men, got the right to vote while women of all colors still couldn't vote.
So I just found this timeline of women's legal rights in the United States, other than voting. In the 1600s, a 17th century law in Massachusetts announced that women would be subjected to the same treatment as witches if they lured men into marriage via the use of high-heeled shoes. In 1641, a body of liberties of the Massachusetts Bay colonists declared that a married woman should be free from bodily correction or stripes by her husband. In 1662, in the Virginia colony, they passed a law incorporating the principle of partus sequitur ventrum, ruling that children of enslaved mothers would be born into slavery regardless of their father's race or status. Oh man, that's just kind of fucked up too. Maryland declared in 1664 that any English woman who married a slave had to live as a slave of her husband's master. In 1718, province of Pennsylvania, now the state of Pennsylvania, married women allowed to own and manage property in their own name during the incapacity of their spouse. Jump ahead into the 19th century. Between 1820 and 1900, primarily through the efforts of physicians, the American Medical Association, and legislators, most abortions in the United States were outlawed. They were outlawed in the 1820s. So here we are 200 years later, and they're trying to outlaw it again. In 1821, in Maine, married women were allowed to own and manage property in their own name during the incapacity of their spouse. So it took another 100 years to get from Pennsylvania to Maine. In Connecticut, a law targeted apothecaries who sold poisons to women for purposes of inducing an abortion. New York made post-quickening abortions a felony and pre-quickening abortions a misdemeanor. In 1835, married women allowed to own but not control property in their own name. In Massachusetts, married women were allowed to own and manage property in their own name during the incapacity of their spouse. Married women were in Tennessee, same thing. 1839, Mississippi, same thing. 1840, Maine, married women were allowed to own but not control property in their own name. Oh, so now they didn't have to have an incapacitated spouse. Same in Maryland in 1841. New Hampshire joined that group in 42. Kentucky in 843. We're still in 1800s. We haven't even hit the Civil War yet. I gotta skip ahead because they're all basically the same. In the 1850s, when Illinois opened its first hospital for the mentally ill in 1851, the state legislature passed a law that within 2 years of passage was amended to require public hearing before a person could be committed against his or her will. And there was one exception, however. A husband could have his wife committed without either public hearing or her consent. Separate economies. Men and women have separate economies. Man, men and women have a separate economy, it looks like, for quite a while. Well into the 1860s. You know, women have been getting the raw deal legally under the law, have been given the raw deal since the beginning of this country, since before the beginning of this country. And if that's the case here, I mean, I have no doubt that that's the standard for all of human history.
I don't think that's true at all in the sense of like, even in China, they weren't getting treated this bad like thousands of years ago, bro.
Yeah.
Like China has a better history of women's rights.
I guess
'Cause
when I
that's
think of history, I'm thinking of like Western history.
Oh yeah, for Western, yeah, definitely. Because that's what I'm saying. Like the whole reason we have, you know, fucking Wing Chun is because women had like reverence in their martial arts style like over 1,000 years ago in China. So that's
Holy
kind of
shit.
where we have proof that that's not the case.
Okay, so I just got to 1900s, and it's still not getting any better for women in this country. No, I just gotta. I'm just gonna share this link because it basically doesn't get very good for women until like. Um, no, still not very good. I'm into this 1960s Equal Pay Act, 1963, abolishing wage disparity based on sex in 1963. 60 years ago. 60 years ago, it starts to kind of look up. Kind of. No, Pregnancy Discrimination Act. Yeah, there we go.
Well, and I'm thinking about it in the sense of the philosophical texts in China in the context of what Taoists were teaching and learning were not making sex out to be something that was bad, but they were also teaching people not to exploit it and not to revel in it. So this is kind of where when you have a society that's not teaching people to exploit and objectify women, then you have multiple 1,000-year-old martial arts created by women because they didn't see them as lesser necessarily.
Yeah.
Like, and they haven't for a long time, even though women have not had an equal position in society at all times. Like, there's definitely points in history where people have been like, not just in China either, but like matriarchal societies are not women dominated. It's just effectively women can attain the same status as men. So you have multiple matriarchal societies in history. So there's like, you know, if women can own land and through that process become like the, you know, when a woman could become a pharaoh, which I think they still called them pharaohs, but they were also queens, that's a matriarchal society. It's not when only women lead. And this is like the kind of It's an asymmetric equivocation that has been presented by the patriarchy as if women's leadership is meant to be like, oh, only we can lead, when in fact their actual leadership structure is just equal possibility of leadership.
So in 1981, the full end of the legal subordination of a wife to her husband was passed. Uh, Kirchberg versus Fenstra, 450 U.S. 455, 1981, is U.S. Supreme Court case in which the court held a Louisiana head and master law which gave sole control of marital property to the husband unconstitutional. That's like the first, like, hey man, that's pretty good. I mean, obviously Roe v. Wade precedes that, but you know, no longer does a wife have to be subordinate to her husband. In 1981, they had to have a law to pass a law to make that a thing. Yeah, I'm not even sure. Does England having a queen as the big cheese, does that even count as a matriarchal society?
Mm, sort of, kind of, but because it's a monarchy, it's like a matriarchal monarchy, so it's not a matriarchal democracy. So that does not make it um ethical just because it's a matriarchy.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, like, we have to look at that nuance in that, yes, it's technically a matriarchy. Um because then, yeah, the women have probably been able to own land if they were nobles for hundreds of years now. Um and there's definitely obviously multiple queens that ruled without kings in the past. So yeah, technically that's a matriarchy. But then I think there's periods of land ownership. So here's the thing: if you have matriarchy in the nobility, but patriarchy in the
Republic or parliament?
vassals, yeah, well, not even in the parliament, but in the populace, then it's more complex because then it restricts who's actually participating in a matriarchy. So it's like, obviously, a monarchy and a plutocracy, um, but then everybody's not actually participating in a matriarchy. So that's kind of where, if you can get to a certain level, then it becomes a matriarchy. But it seems to be you can only be born or marry into that system. So then there's actually a very small population that's actually participating in the matriarchy then. Which again, that's why obviously in America we have at least two systems for everything, because it's like you and I have a different medical system than rich people.
Yeah.
Like the healthcare system is different for wealthy and poor people, and that's kind of where it's like, it's just not, they don't, they know it, but they don't understand the gap, in the sense of that's kind of where it's to let them go to the doctor moment.
It's why El Duce was able to get out of his hotel room in a matter of days with a unapproved treatment that nobody else can get, and why he is taking on actual Mussolini's practices of delivering his sermons from a balcony up on high, because you really can't get nobody can get close to him right now, because they won't even admit if he's tested negative, or is still testing positive. They're just saying he's clear to interact with people, and he's not a transmission risk or something like that. But they've got to put him far away so nobody can actually see him, because if they could actually see him, they'd be like, oh man, this motherfucker's still sick. That's all I'm going to say about Cheeto Mussolini today. Motherfucker's still sick. They know it. We all know it. We just can't prove it because they're controlling the feed. They're controlling the broadcast. They already
Editing the
control.
show.
Yeah.
Well, and this is what's funny to me is like he went on Fox News for 2 hours and ended up threatening Iran. Meanwhile, Iran is like not paying attention and is trying to quell fighting in Azerbaijan and Armenia, which they kind of seems like successfully did because they had a ceasefire. So it's funny when you have. I was getting to the point where I'm like, oh, there's a silver lining in Americans being anti-science during a pandemic in that the saber rattling had kind of stopped. Like there had not been any saber rattling, but then I thought too soon, and this motherfucker comes out threatening Iran. But luckily, obviously, Iran did not respond because they're not that type of country.
God,
Which
we all knew that the steroids were going to wear off and he was going to start getting really aggressive and irrational. But
dude,
Iran wasn't even on the radar.
no. Well, and I'm thinking, I wonder how many people on the right wing could name the president of Iran if somebody just went up and asked them. How many of them say it was still Ahmadinejad? And like,
Well, like last week when I asked, I wonder how many people could find Armenia or Azerbaijan on the map. I wonder how many people actually could find Iran without labels and
Oh, yeah.
national
Oh, God.
lines.
No way. No fucking way, man. And I only, there's one point where we had to memorize all the countries and their capitals, and I don't remember those. So, like, if I was to find Iran on a map with no lines, I would have to do it locating from Turkey. So I'm not going to pretend I could just point at it on
Yeah.
a map.
No, without
But
the
like,
lines.
I'd be able to figure out where the fuck it is,
Yeah.
like without the lines eventually, because of the topographical, like indicators, and that's kind of where I'm confident of that to know that it's like there is this sense of America being the biggest, not only geographic country, but population. And the Americans are so diluted that it makes them not think that they have to memorize how other land areas look or what their geographies look like or what their habitats are like, because then that reinforces this exceptionalism that keeps them stuck here perpetually, mentally and physically, because it's this element of Americans are like, oh, I'll either travel to the 48 states that are contiguous, or I'll go to space. That's like America's thought process of traveling, in the sense of I'll wait till Elon makes it. Thank God bless capitalism. I'll wait till Elon makes it possible for me to buy a ticket to space, and that's when I'll travel. And they don't ever consider traveling to the rest of this planet as like something that's even worthy of monetary waste. And it's this like the cultural distaste for traveling outside of the country, but then having these vacation spots that are meant to signify wealth, but are actually just like ghetto rich. It's like, oh, I'm trying to think how to put it. Americans don't know what they don't know, and the media reinforces that by keeping them perpetually fixated on material waste, while also making them feel like they have access to all of the fucking information on the planet. It's like a crazy delusion that they've created.
Yeah.
And this is kind of where Facebook reinforces that shit, because it's like, oh, 2 billion people are on Facebook, so I have access to the world, but the algorithm's only letting you see like 35 people that are gonna like just infuriate you. That's the only thing you're gonna be able to see, even though there's 2 billion people on that fucking platform.
Saw an article recently titled something along the lines of Americans are saving more, but not at the right time. And I think it's a terrible title because basically it shows that the people who are able to save at all, because there are a lot of people who aren't able to save anything now and are literally on the verge of being out on the streets. But it's basically the title itself was an indictment or a criticism of people saving money and paying down their debts because they're learning how to cook, or they're realizing they can go without the $10 coffee, or they're realizing they don't have to eat out all the time and do all this stuff because the situation has shown a lot of people that they can be a lot more self-sufficient if they have the resources to actually take advantage of the capacity to be self-sufficient.
So with my $10 reusable coffee filter and my 2 jugs that I make my cold brew and contain it in, $10 yields 2 cans of ground coffee, French roast, and that lasts me about 6 to 8 months. So just to start, I could spend less than $30, and aside from paying for water, which we have to do anyways, that's like 6 months of coffee for me. Two $10 coffees. That turns into months of coffee.
Yeah, we've been making our own coffee for years now. And,
yeah.
Well, I forgot. We don't have to pay for water here, and that's one of the reasons we live here. So, even I didn't even think about that in the cost factor.
Reduced coffee costs with free water.
Yeah. Well, and then man, the Hollywood showers. Hollywood showers are worth it alone.
Ooh,
like,
yeah.
Because then they have a gray system here that, they're obviously recycling water locally. In addition to the what's it called, the city, but that's kind of where again. I remember going to California and being in like a fucking huge house, and then people having to, cut their shower time, and I'm like, man, it's so funny what people trade off for luxury in their heads. When it's like, man, what good is this big ass house if you can't stand in the shower for fucking half an hour because there's like a statewide
seriously when I was growing up in California, there was this big push because it was during this multi-year drought, and they're like, when you're brushing your teeth, turn the water off when you're not actually rinsing out your toothbrush or getting some water to rinse your mouth with. And it's one of those things. I think that's part of the reason that we have those the kind of faucets where you have to press it down to wash your hands, and then as soon as the plunger stops, or the pressure, the plunger lifts and the water stops pouring, you got to press it again because it's metered.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, that's I've met a lot of people who moved to California and they love it, and I always think of it as everything's better in heaven syndrome, because when you live in the Midwest and it's like there are limited options, there are limited resources, there really isn't that much to do, or 20, 30 years ago there wasn't that much to do. California is this dream of all this opportunity and all this stuff, and there still is a lot of opportunity, and things have changed quite a bit in the last like 20 years. But when I was a kid there versus coming here, the only real difference that I noticed was there was less Chinese food here. There was snow. Some things weren't as available, but they were still going to make it here. Target exists all over the country. Walmart exists all over the country. So it's not like you couldn't get your mass-produced goods socially things were different. You know, there's a different social climate.
Well, and you just reminded me. I would get the East Bay catalog when I was a kid. So even though Indiana got their shoes 6 months late, if you knew what the fuck you were doing, you could still get the
Yeah,
shoes that were, out on the coast
that's
through
right.
the catalog.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
that's why that whole company is called East Bay. But why it got big? Because they would get the fucking fashion 6 months ahead,
Yeah.
and dumbass people in Indiana just didn't know you can get a fucking a magazine that has all their shit in it.
You know, that's the thing. Like, catalog companies have been around for a long time. I mean, Sears is going away. Walgreens used to be a catalog company. That's like an old. We don't need a catalog now because we've got the internet.
Somebody said the internet used to come in the mail.
Yeah. Okay, Grandma, it's time to go back to bed. Well, I mean, Netflix did used to come in the mail.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, web pages are just basically catalogs online. That's kind of
Yeah.
where again it's like
Yeah.
everything is full circle, man.
Oh, so maybe that's why Facebook has so much appeal. It's like a new age church.
100%. Yeah.
Holy shit!
it
Yeah, you can
is.
go and get your disinformation, your misinformation, your propaganda all in one place without having to listen to
They
anyone.
even taking everybody's asking for donations to their favorite charity on their birthday now. The virtue signal. Oh, I love dogs. I'm gonna ask for charity for my dogs. I don't want a present. Put that money towards this charity. Facebook gets a huge cut, but I don't care because I'm virtue signaling. And it's like I don't blame people for falling into that trap. It's just a matter of like, I wonder how many people thought about Facebook's cut on all processing all of those fucking donations then, because it's like surely they're not doing that shit for free. There's no way because
What kind of taste does Facebook actually get? I haven't looked into it because whenever I see that stuff, it's like, man, I know they're just taking money.
oh yeah, because you have to processing transactions cost money, period. It doesn't matter who's doing it. So they're making money off of processing those transactions and then hiding how much they're getting off of it to make people feel good about it and then not feel bad about how much they're taking. So again, there's no way they're getting 0%. But who knows how much is actually like, because they can publish one thing, but then maybe the fine print is like a whole, all
And this
these.
stuff's all legal too. That's
That's
the craziest part. We're taking money for charity. We're taking the money that was supposed to be for charity. That's what happens.
Non-profit. It's a non-profit.
Because Facebook takes their potential for profit.
Oh man, yeah. And then what's so funny to me is like the entire premise of a nonprofit, the way that they've been constructed in America is completely unsustainable. So that's kind of where also they disrupt economies. So for example, one of the biggest examples that gets used is when people donate clothes or shoes, not meaning to rhyme. But when it happens is when, say, for example, you have a place where missionaries send a bunch of shoes. Well, if there's a cobbler there or somebody who makes shoes or sells shoes, then all of a sudden they're out of business because they just had a bunch of shoes dumped on them for free. So there's no incentive to go to the local shops and spend money on the shoes. So then it stagnates. Whatever these sorts of charity dumps end up doing, it stagnates the growth in those communities. And then I've been to the biggest slum on the entire African continent. What happens is a lot of these donated clothes end up in a fucking trash pile because nobody wants them.
Yeah.
And there's like, I didn't take pictures because I'm not a fucking asshole on a safari. But there was I want to say a football field size pile of discarded clothes that nobody was wearing, like just in the middle of it. And it was like, it felt symbolic to me of like, oh, we don't need this shit. So we're just going to pile it because I want to buy, like they want to, I mean, again, when you see people in the slum, they're all walking around with pride. So there's this in America, when you don't have money, you're made to feel shame. That doesn't exist in other countries where I see poor people walking around with their heads up high, and I'm like, oh, they're not made to feel shameful in the same way that Americans are, which is something that you can never buy your way out of. Because then the only way you can buy your way out of that shame is by paying somebody else to feel that shame. And that's the way the system is designed. And that's kind of how like Americans are so unaware of how this whole system is built on seeing like the only way you can feel rich is by seeing somebody feel poor. That's the only way you can feel rich in the system.
You know, you reminded me of when I was in China 15 years ago. I remember we were on the bus driving around or riding around, and my dad started taking pictures of these giant parking lots full of bicycles. Some of them stacked like 5 bicycles high, and at first it's like, well, that's crazy. They just got too many bicycles. But then I started to notice whenever we were walking around certain populated areas, people would ride their bike up to a shop and get off of it. They wouldn't even lock it up. They would just like set it against the bike rack. And then somebody else would come out and they would grab that bike and they would ride off. And before you knew it, somebody else would come in and they would drop their bike off. And that person who came in right before, whose their bike had been, I guess it's not there, but the state's bike had been ridden off by somebody else, they'd hop on the first available bike. And they just had so many that people didn't worry about it. It was like free transportation, free mass transit in a sense, because here are all these bicycles. And when the tire gets ruptured because of use, they put it on a truck and they take it to the bike parking lot to be refurbished, and another bike is put out into the pool. And I don't think that anyone was like ashamed of riding the bicycle, the bike share. I think they're all just like, hey, we've got bikes, we've got transportation. And here you gotta spend a considerable amount of money to have an electric bicycle or even a regular bicycle, and then you gotta lock it up. I read about somebody whose electric bike, there's these electric bikes popping up all over the place where you can pedal, but they're all also powered, where some like teenager went to the park and then came back to his bike and the power cable had been severed. What kind of shit is that? You can't even have a bike anymore without worrying about it getting, vandalized.
Yeah. Well, and that's what happens is when you're in a country where not many people having feels like you're shoving it in their face, but when you have it, you don't feel that because you're not in that mindset.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where a lot of Americans don't have shit to lose, and they're more and more by the day have less and less to lose. And that's kind of like more people's shit is going to get destroyed because those people don't care about our whatever, like your computers, our cars. Like when people have, and then they have that taken away for whatever reason, then they have nothing to lose. And those people in that mindset are destructive for good reason, in that it's arbitrarily taken away from them. And this is kind of why when we're in a situation of having, we have to like call out that bullshit. So then if we ever get in that situation, it's not, oh, all of a sudden you don't have anything, because then that's when those people's voices are disenfranchised. It's like, if you have a problem in America, you can't speak about it because your bias negates your voice. And that's the problem with this country. Also, then
right though.
Right. Then that's also the problem with then presenting the Associated Press as unbiased, because then they'll quell out people's voices as if it's not part of keeping problems hidden. and also making people not feel bad for creating those problems in passive consumption. Like, there's a whole system to make passive consumption hide the negative outcomes, and this is like why I think The Good Place was such a great exercise in philosophical exploration of wrong, because if you're a passive consumer and the things you passively consume create slavery or create uh, unequal pay for women or create misogyny in the workplace, just because you passively consume those things and don't actively take part, that shit accumulates on your record too. And people don't want to accept that passive consumption involves the responsibility for the supply chain and whatever you passively consume. Like, passive consumption involves active maintaining of the supply chain in which the passive consumption result in what results in the passive consumption. And that's kind of where, again, I think there was an article in I don't know if it was the New York Times, I forget which publication, but it was trying to break down how many slaves were associated with each individual activity or owning something in America. And then it's fucked up because when they break it down like that, it's then trying to put off the responsibility on stolen people who were brought here against our will, as if like, oh, you being stuck here because you're not allowed to leave because you can't afford to fucking buy a ticket and move because this system steals your generational wealth. Oh, it's your fault too. That's some disingenuous ass bullshit that then, like, completely biased center left or I don't know what to call it, center right. Yeah, because it's center right media, which thinks of itself as left, then tries to, again, it's asymmetric equivalence where black people trying to survive in America is not the same as somebody with white privilege exploiting. It's not the fucking same thing. And that's kind of where I don't like what Jay-Z did with his career or his trajectory, but it's not the same thing as RJ Reynolds. It's not the fucking same thing at all as these tobacco companies, or like, what's the name? The dude who made Reefer William Randolph or Hearst is it
William Randolph Hearst?
William Randolph Hearst.
You know, that guy owned like millions of acres of paper pulp farm.
Yeah,
and he stood to lose like vast fortunes because hemp outgrows hemp for paper, just for paper, outgrows those trees at like a rate of like 20-1 or something dumb. Like the area that you get from one pulp tree, you can yield 20 times the volume in hemp paper pulp. And it doesn't destroy the soil. It doesn't completely unbalance the pH of the soil. It doesn't like strip the nutrients completely. It like its root system is such that it returns vital nutrients to the soil.
Because and this is kind of where obviously William Randolph Hearst was exploiting the land. He's exploiting the population. He's exploiting the government. He's exploiting economics. His level of exploitation is not the same as Jay-Z, who is the mammal trapped between the electrified fence and the water to drown. And that's kind of where presenting those two as if they're the same is disingenuous. And then it makes it difficult to get out of exploitation, because then it presents it as if exploitation is the only thing that is possible and it's the only way that we can ever use resources. But this gets back to the miseducation and the misinformation, because I think a lot of people only associate miseducation with Lauryn Hill, not realizing everybody in this fucking country was miseducated. And I think they misunderstood the like her acknowledging that she was miseducated in that evolution that's presented in those tracks is meant to be something that everybody else is supposed to reflect on, but she's just putting her own journey out there. So when Lauryn Hill presented herself as being miseducated, she's calling everybody else miseducated too, but everybody else is not ready to accept the responsibility to move beyond. The only way you can get out of the miseducation is to fucking acknowledge that it happened in the first place. So that's what's funny to me about like that whole album happening, and then somebody like Lauryn Hill getting in trouble for fucking tax evasion while we got fucking Voldemort. Lauryn Hill went to fucking prison. You telling me Lauryn Hill went to prison?
I bet she paid more in taxes than Voldemort did.
Probably. I'm sure she did. But she went to prison? Wesley Snipes went to prison? Oh, huh. That's weird. Huh. I bet that they were fucking nobles too.
Yeah, they probably created more economic activity just with their creative output than people realize, and they got imprisoned for it. This is America.
I mean, and this is why it's so frustrating to me when like people who think of themselves as left wing like have the nerve to even waste a goddamn breath on talking about something outside these borders. Like, you ain't got the luxury, the time, nor the moral high ground to talk about no fucking Uyghurs. So shut the fuck up about the Uyghurs until you fix the shit that these fuckers created here. Don't even start talking about that shit. You can feel bad for them internally. You can read about it. But don't talk about that shit because you have no fucking capacity. Like, there's been so much wrong shit in this country that the left has not fixed that they have no fucking business, no goddamn business talking about anything beyond these borders. We got no fucking business. This is not our time to be fucking thinking we have the capacity to speak on other people's revolutions, on other people's situations, on getting involved in fucking Kurds situations in Syria. Fuck no, we don't know what the fuck is going on in our own goddamn backyard. We have not fixed white supremacy. We have not exorcised the white supremacist demons from our fucking infrastructure. You telling me we can talk about the fucking Uyghurs? Nah, bro. Nah, sis. Nah, we got to slow that shit back. And people got to understand this is not about not empathizing with people. This is about acknowledging that there's not been any fucking successes to cheer about, to fucking move on. Yeah, gay people can get married. Yeah, gay people aren't getting killed as often. But we can't move on out of this country yet. And that's kind of where I'm like, I'm saying it in the form of a show because I think you don't want to like get in a one-on-one conversation with somebody on the left about this specific issue because you don't want to make them feel bad because you also want them to keep fighting. But you have to make them understand that they haven't won shit here. They have not won shit here. We're fighting the same fucking fight my goddamn grandfather fought, the same fucking fight my father fought, because people on the left have been splitting their fucking attention, splitting their energy, trying to put that shit in China and some shit they never even been to.
Yeah.
These motherfuckers never even been to China, talking about the Uyghur situation, not knowing if it's from propaganda or not. And that's where I'm like, man, you need to stay your fucking attention in this goddamn country and fix this shit before you try to even think about moving on to some fucking Uyghurs. Because again, this is not about. I know Uyghurs are in trouble. I know they are. But black people have never gotten out of trouble in this fucking country. And people cannot act like we have the time or fucking Native Americans have never gotten out. They're still on fucking reservations, for fuck's sake, y'all. They're still on fucking reservations.
Yeah, man.
They're still on fucking reservations. We can't talk about Uyghur concentration camps when we have people on fucking literal reservations here. We just can't do it. There's some major cognitive dissonance here that the left has to deal with. Because that's why we still have Native Americans on reservations. You think Native Americans want to be on reservations? The only reason they stay there is so fucking white people don't fuck with them. Because as soon as they step off, white people keep fucking with them on the reservations. The only reason they stay on there is because the law protects them from white man's law abusing them on the reservation. That's the only reason they stay there. If they could go off the reservation and know that the white man's asymmetric law would not be applied to them because they're not white, they'd leave the reservation a lot more. But they're fucking stuck there because they're held hostage by the shit that wiped out their ancestors. And we're trying to act like we can talk about the fucking Uyghurs. We got a whole population hostage behind the buckskin curtain beyond the fucking black people getting killed by the police, because the Native Americans are getting killed by police at a more disproportionate rate than black people. And we can't even talk about that shit yet.
Native American women go missing at the highest rate.
Yeah, man.
Like, they just aren't reported when they go missing.
And we can't talk about that shit because the left is too fucking high on their own false accomplishments to actually deal with the fucking problems in this fucking country. And that shit is crazy to me. That shit is crazy that people would rather post on Facebook and talk about what's happening in China and what's happening in a concentration camp than actually do something about their own fucking country. That's why Facebook is dangerous, because it's addictive to all kinds of people that make themselves think that they're doing social work by posting about the Uyghurs.
Yeah. I just don't trust any of the media that focuses on China anymore. Like, unless it's coming from China, which, and then, even then I have to take it with a grain of salt because I can only read what Google translates. It's tough. Like, everything. When I went to China when I was 25, it felt like I was in a version of America, of Chinatown in New York or Chinatown in San Francisco, but everywhere. And people kind of spoke English. They mostly spoke Chinese, obviously, because I was in China. But it wasn't the place that our media paints it. It wasn't the place that it wasn't home of the big bad. It wasn't where the big bad even comes from. The big bad comes from a place in the minds of the West.
Dude, when you're around a bunch of Chinese people, they're just fucking people, man.
Yeah.
It's so crazy, like, how much our media has portrayed this monolithic government-run communist army it's so far from the reality, man. It's so crazy how many Americans who are unable to get out of the bubble believe that shit. And that's why, to me, it's the same people who then talk about, oh, the end of America is the end of the world, and use those two terms in a synonymous manner, as if America falling apart means the entire world is falling apart. But that's because their vision is so
myopic,
limited. Yeah, it's so myopic that they can't understand that 320 million people don't represent 7.5 billion.
I looked it up earlier. The estimate is now 7.8.
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's up a little bit.
I mean, 300 million. That's the difference that's the population in the United States practically. So
it didn't happen here.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see, wait, what percentage of the world population is the United States. Get my trusty calculator out if I can find
It's
it.
at 4, right? Oh, wait.
Calculator. Um, 330 million divided by 7, 8, 7.8 billion is, yeah, it's 4.23%. It's not that much. That's really not that much. And out of that 4%, 1% of that, or no, 3% of that 4% is in charge of all the money and the decisions.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Well, and it says disproportionate representation, once again, that is meant to be perpetuated so that the illusion stands. Like, the only way you can think 300 and whatever million people are in charge of 7.8 billion is if 1% are in charge of 99%.
Yeah, so it's 0.0012% is the percentage of the U.S. population that is making all of these decisions that affect us and other countries through really just one-sided trade deals, economic deals, through the application of tariffs and sanctions and trade restrictions. 0.001% is making those decisions. It's even less, actually, because a portion of that group of people are divided from the other. I mean, aside from having extraordinary amounts of money and what a crazy time to be alive.
Well, and it's funny. So in the Matrix, it's technically post-apocalypse, right?
Yeah.
And I always look at these post-apocalyptic scenarios, and I'm less and less inclined to think Americans can make it to these. So that's kind of where it's like these people are Gravy Seals and McMilitias. They're not going to be able to. They couldn't last a month in quarantine. They're not going to be able to last to the apocalyptic scenario that is in all these science fiction films, and it's only the people who have a strong sense of community and not individuality. Like Zion wasn't a bunch of fucking capitalists.
It was a bunch of culturally ambiguous, racially ambiguous people who were fighting for the survival
Sexually ambiguous.
Yeah. It was all ambiguous. It was a city of ambiguity fighting for freedom.
Yeah, and it was not focused on accumulating wealth.
Yeah, because they were all wearing rags.
Yeah.
Nobody had nice stuff.
The only person who cared about material things was the fucking trader.
Well, yeah, even what's his name, General Locke or whatever.
Everybody's in rags, man. It's leather and S&M stuff in the Matrix, but when in the real world, they're all in rags.
Yeah, it was Commander Locke. He was the commander of the Zion defense. Even he was wearing rags, and he only wanted more ships to protect Zion. It wasn't even like a vanity thing for him. It was we need as much protection as we can possibly get kind of thing. As much as they tried to paint him as like Morpheus's nemesis or his rival or enemy or whatever it was, they were still on the same damn side. they still wanted the same thing. They just disagreed on how to get there.
Yeah.
So
Well, and I think that's a great example when they have like the council. Everybody is willing to compromise to get to the end goal, even
Yeah.
Morpheus, and that's kind of where that's how they end up at the end goal.
Yeah.
Is compromise. So that's like one of the biggest lessons in that franchise, which I think is why Americans didn't like it.
Compromise and patience. You have to.
Yep.
Sometimes you have to wait. Sometimes you have to compromise. Sometimes you have to work with what you have. And sometimes you have to hold on. You know, have a little faith in your team. Know that they're out there working towards the best interest for the entire group, not just themselves. It might even involve some sacrifice. Of course, if that sacrifice involves flying around and having some epic Superman-style battle in the rain while wearing some cyber goth outfit, that's also kind of cool.
Well, and even then, the whole way that Neo won was by not fighting back, and
Yeah.
that was like also going to be something that Americans don't like. They want the way to win is to cut the bad guy's head off or plant a big ass bomb and walk away slowly or some shit. Like you can't build up 3 films and have the way you beat the boss be by not fighting. That's not going to work in America, and that's why Americans hated that shit. It's like the antithesis of what toxic masculinity tells everybody to do. Like
Yeah.
you're not supposed to be able to win by submitting.
Well, he defeats Agent Smith. He defeats the system from within the system at that point, right? We can.
But it's because the system resets, and the only way the system's going to reset is if he submits.
Yeah, that's true.
So it's like he has to give up because him continuing to fight will only keep the system polluted and it'll never get to reset. So this is this element of like kamikazes are not honorable in America. Like seppuku is not honorable in America. They've actively made taking yourself out to take out the enemy dishonorable because our enemies have done that to Americans. So then they want to be like, well, fuck these guys when they're kamikazes and shit like that. That's you don't do that and then turn around and use drones. So it's like there's a whole lot of cognitive dissonance that then results in one of the greatest film series that's ever been made being hated on by people who are incapable of having a hero that submits.
You know, and they made that the Animatrix. That was like a series of vignettes that all tried to provide enough explanation for why the characters in the Matrix behave the way they do.
Mm-hmm.
And that one wasn't even well received. I loved the Animatrix. I thought that was great. That whole like 6-episode piecemeal they did as a web series to get people, you know, interested in it.
Yeah.
That was really well done. And then when they released the rest of it, and you got to see the story where they convinced the machine to not be aggressive towards humans, and it fought alongside humans, and it tried to save them, and in the end, it still couldn't because they lost to the other Sentinels.
I think where they made their mistake was they were trying to be too direct with their storytelling when they were doing all the franchising stuff because they made the Animatrix and then they made the video games. But by trying to be too faithful to the source material where they're like, I think maybe even the first 2 video games you couldn't play as Neo. It might have been, I don't remember exactly, but it like what they did ended up souring a lot of people to the series. So by the time the 3rd film came out, everybody's like, fuck this series, fuck this movie. They just took all our money and was just a cash grab. When it kind of was, but because of the way that studios exploit intellectual properties, not necessarily because of the creative vision. Because I feel like in trying to keep their creative vision like cohesive and restricting what the games could do, it ended up making everything trip over itself. And it was like
Yeah.
they would have been better off establishing a separate Matrix video game universe altogether if they were going to do the video games at all.
Like if they'd have just jumped straight
at
into
all.
Matrix Online, and
Right,
and basically
exactly.
it would have been Grand Theft Auto in the Matrix, which
Exactly.
Grand Theft Auto kind of already is.
But they didn't. It seemed like they didn't want too many new stories to happen with the Neo character that weren't anything to do with what the stories they told, which is like sometimes you have to let go of the characters like that in order for them to survive in pop culture. But I think, you know, knowing
that's how Luke Skywalker managed to survive, and that's
exactly with the books.
Like fanfic is the place where characters live on. They don't live on in the original storyline. They can't, because those stories have conclusions.
Well, and this is where Lovecraft was so genius about letting people use his works, is like, you know, encouraging fan fiction is how you create characters that survive forever and end up everywhere.
Well, you know, I don't want to give, you know, HP too much credit, because he was a xenophobe, and by every account he was a real piece of shit. But he created a story universe that is compelling and provides a foundation or a platform, or not a platform. It fosters a type of really sinister isolation and fear, and it allows people to explore those things, and it creates a world where, you know, overcoming fear is key to survival. And so, I really enjoyed what I've seen of Lovecraft Country. I've only watched 6 episodes, but what I like about it is that they are able to create characters that are kind of real. I don't feel like I'm watching you know, this story of the superhero emergence. I feel like I'm watching people reacting to situations that are truly what the fuck worthy. Like, what's happening here? Holy crap! Let's look at these scenarios, and then they inject it into, you know, civil rights era America, 50s America, 60s America. Was it 50s? It's the 50s, and so it's doing something kind of like what Watchmen did. It puts the viewer into this place where you can't. It's hard to believe, but we know that a lot of those kind of sentiments were real. And then it throws this extra layer of confusion onto it, of like, okay, so it's this different time, and it's far enough in the past that it's actually kind of foreign, and this behavior is despicable. And then lo and behold, there are these like otherworldly, you know, supernatural shit going on. They've done a really good job. And they haven't even talked about like Cthulhu or Azathoth or Dagon or any of the elder gods. They haven't gone into classic Cthulhu mythology. That's the part that I really enjoy. Like they're tapping into this universe without even directly referencing the big bads that everyone's actually afraid of resuming, you know, activity in this physical realm.
Well, I think that's part of it, in the sense of, it seems like most of the mythology has come from the fans and not even necessarily directly from Lovecraft over time. In that the whole reason Cthulhu is still popular is because so much fan fiction in different forms has been created, like video games and shit like that. So again, this is where letting go of something at a certain point, you know, Alan Moore has nothing to do with Watchmen. He has nothing to do with the movie. He has nothing to do with the TV show or the video games. The video games sucked ass, but the movie, the full the Ultimate Cut and the TV show were great. So like I have no problem with people letting go of their shit to then have other people reinterpret it with the original creator have nothing to do with it.
So I've got a book. It's H.P. Lovecraft and Others, Tales of the Cthulhu Mythos. And out of the 21 stories that are contained in this, 21 vignettes, there are two H.P. Lovecraft stories, Hunter in the Dark and The Call of Cthulhu. And everything else is, Clark Ashton Smith, Robert E. Howard, Frank Belcamp Long, August Derleth, Robert Bloch, they're Colin Wilson, a bunch of names, and only two of the stories are from Lovecraft. I think this is exactly what you're talking about. There are so many people involved in the creation of that story universe that it goes beyond its origin. They've expanded it to the point that it can include all of these other things.
And it's the same with Batman at this point.
Yeah.
Batman is no longer the creation of Bob Kane and Bill Finger. It's Batman's way bigger than that.
Yep.
He's way bigger than that at this point. And there's so much to the character and the different iterations of it and the different writers' variations that this is why it's funny to me when people talk about one version of Batman as if there's only one version. I mean,
yeah.
That's just such a small-minded way to approach any character. Even, like Robin Hood, for example. There's so many iterations of Robin Hood at this point, and so many retellings of that same story where, obviously in every situation, Robin's meant to be a hero, but in every situation, it's different levels. And sometimes he's more of an anti-hero than an actual hero, and that's okay. But acting as if there's only one variation on the story is just detached from reality, where I feel like there's this pseudo fidelity desire for people to stick to one version that a certain, whoever is desiring people to stick to the same version, they want everybody to accommodate to their world. And it's like, this is my favorite version, so this is the only version. And this is weird interpretation of literature.
I like the Green Lantern Batman.
I like the White Lantern Batman. It's like this Batman. And it's like, as if they can't, like, they all exist.
Yeah.
To different degrees, and that's kind of where, again, oh man, this is the beauty of the multiverse. And
Mobius Chair Batman.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Let's see what other cool looking Batman images. Future Batman.
Well, there's one where
Dr. Manhattan Batman.
Annihilation Batman.
Yeah.
He looks like the Flash mixed with Batman. And then there's like a Doomsday Batman where he has Doomsday's DNA mixed with him. And that one looks pretty fucking cool too. But it's like, people.
Insider Suit Batman. Oh, he's tough. He just waylaid Darkseid.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Hellbat. His suit is forged by Superman in the core of a star. Fuck. That's actually that means there's a Batman for everyone.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I feel like we've just listed off more Batmans than obviously than are necessary. And almost all of them are still Bruce Wayne.
Well, and it's funny because I don't know if you've seen the Bat Who Laughs, but I didn't really like the character at first, but the more Batman 89 fanboys try to act as if Bruce or Michael Keaton's Batman is the only iteration, it made me appreciate the Bat Who Laughs even more. And after a while, I'm like, oh, the Bat Who Laughs is one of the actual greatest iterations, just because it turns everything on its head. I mean, it's not the only one that does it, but it does it in the best way. Um, so then all those fanboys who are like, Batman never does this. Well, you haven't read comic books for the last 3 years, clearly, because Bat Who Laughs does all that and worse.
Yeah.
He's one of the darkest iterations of Bruce Wayne.
Well, he's infected by the Joker toxin.
Exactly, and that's why again, it's like this iteration of the character is it's the culmination of all these years of lore that went a place that it never went. And those fanboys just don't want to go there because their minds are they want Batman to be what they were when he was a kid and he inspired them. Well, maybe you should have realized this grown man was putting a child's life in danger and he was a psychopath, sociopath who was also a rich person dealing with trauma. So there's a whole bunch of layers to Batman that you can possibly understand as a child that as an adult, now you have to look at the character with a more critical viewpoint.
So there's an episode or a storyline within Batman when the Joker kills Robin. And
which one? Oh yeah, the death in the family.
Yeah, and it leads to the whole resurgence of the Red Mask or the Red Hood. And at one point, he's talking to Alfred. He's like, I was able to overcome my trauma before I began the mission, but yada yada yada. He hasn't overcome his trauma yet. I'm listening. I think about that. It's like he didn't fucking overcome his trauma. He's putting on a costume and beating the shit out of people who can't afford to buy a TV.
Well, I don't know if you remember as well. That was the one that the audience voted on.
Oh, I saw something about that part, and I didn't pay attention to it because I thought that's stupid.
Fun fact. This is when they were writing this storyline, they put an 800 number in the comics leading up to the issue, and people were given the capacity to call in and vote whether Robin should live or die. And these motherfuckers offed them through the vote. So this is like...
Ooh, that's just dirty.
Yeah, man.
They did Robin wrong. They did him so dirty.
Right, is because the readers fucking voted him off. They voted him out the comic. So then the whole reason he got retconned is because the writers were then like, this is kind of a bad choice to give up this. Like, we probably shouldn't have had a kid get killed.
Yeah.
Probably not a good decision.
By the fucking Joker with a crowbar and a bomb.
But again, when that type of shit has happened in the comics, then as an adult, you have to look at Bruce Wayne and be like, this guy's a fucking psychopath. He routinely put children's lives in danger as if it was not a big deal. And basically...
Here, wear this bright yellow and red outfit so they can see you, so they won't see me.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. He's using fucking child shields. That's literally what Bruce Wayne was doing. And we're supposed to, as adults, act like that wasn't the case and act like because we were stupid as kids and didn't see it then, that we're supposed to just keep pretending that Batman's this fucking stand-up rich guy who goes and uses wealth to save people but doesn't actually solve the problems in society. But we're supposed to overlook that part too.
So this is kind of amusing. Back in January, when the Chinese were first talking about the snake pneumonia, and then how they thought it was bat flu, and we joked about how Batman gets bat flu when he gets sick. The principal filming of Batman or the Batman with Robert Pattinson, it was delayed because he got COVID. So in a sense, Batman did get the bat flu.
Yeah, I mean,
it was going to happen. eventually Batman would get sick.
Well, it's crazy. I don't know if it's true or not, but supposedly they've had problems trying to keep Robert Pattinson working out. So wanting us, there's rumors that they don't want to work with the dude anymore, so they're gonna potentially cut the sequels even before it's already been released because he's like not wanting to do the workouts or some shit. And that's where when I found that out, I'm like, this guy must be just on a different level where if you can just mix two or at least two sequels or the capacity for yourself to be in a film franchise because you don't want to work out, that's some. He must not care about fucking money at all. It's like, nope,
wow.
do the sit-ups. I don't want to do the push-ups. I don't care about making 20 million or 100 million on the next film. I don't give a shit. That's some next level shit right there.
The Batman star Robert Pattinson says he refuses to work out while quarantined and thinks that people who exercise frequently are part of the problem. This is an interview with GQ. He says, I think if you're working out all the time, you're part of the problem. That's the quote. They just said it twice. You set a precedent. No one was doing this in the 70s. Even James Dean. He wasn't exactly ripped. And he adds that, where is it? While in the middle of filming Reeves' movie, now scheduled for release October 1, 2021, when production halted because of the spread of the coronavirus, he said he's just not focused on staying in shape for the superhero role because they're not filming. They're not going to go back to filming. So why is he? I understand this. He doesn't want to do. He doesn't want to engage in some extra curricular activity that doesn't matter because he's not. They're not filming anytime soon.
No, man, I don't blame him. And again, this is where it's funny. The way that it's being presented as if he's the diva when it's like, yeah, when you actually look at it, it's like, no, he's right.
He's being reasonable.
He's also recovering. He doesn't want to overexert himself.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. He's on some next level shit, man. If he's like, fuck that money.
Well, he's got Twilight money. He's got 4 Twilight movies that all. I mean, man, when I watched that series on Hulu,
money,
dude, that's like it's like a supernatural Avengers movie where they all have supernatural powers instead of technology or metahuman powers.
Gets those residuals.
Yeah. Twilight.
That's a lot in residuals.
Twilight's a huge series. That movie series was like all over the place for years back in 2009 and on.
Faces on so much stuff.
Yeah, he's worth $100 million apparently. So yeah, he's definitely not caring about another 100 million.
Yeah, he gets to make movies because he wants to, not because he needs to. Seriously, like if his participation in the Batman was gonna improve the Batman character series franchise as a whole, then he's doing them the favor. He doesn't need Batman to be famous or to enjoy his life. He's set. They're the divas, the studio people who are bitching about him not wanting to exercise. He won't exercise. So?
No, man, clearly. And that's kind of where, again, you got to be on some next level mental shit to turn down $100 million or $200 million effectively. And that's where I'm like, yeah, man, good for him.
Yeah. I wouldn't mind seeing a fat Batman. I feel like
I don't think he's going to be fat so much as he's just not going to be huge.
Batman doesn't need to be huge either. They can give us an Aeon Flux style Batman where everyone's rail thin and just agile and frail.
Well, I mean, what's it called? The Dark Knight Returns. He kind of was on the thick side.
It's true.
The way Frank Miller had him rendered.
But he's also old.
I think that's the point, though. Yeah, he's like old and thick.
I think that's actually why what's his name? Ben Affleck, the Affleck Batman. I feel like that actually works out as old Batman. like one that you don't believe is as fast or agile or whatever, like I can buy that. I can buy Ben Affleck not being like the most fit Batman. You know, he's like,
I mean, he was ripped though.
I know it's true, but
He was huge, dude. He was fucking ripped in that, like, unnecessarily so.
yeah, but Batman in the comics is also unnecessarily ripped too.
But I'm saying that's where, like, they could have played him fat, but they played him unnecessarily ripped. So, like, I agree. Like, they could have gone chunky Ben Affleck.
And it would have made just as much sense.
Yeah, it would have made even more sense. But then they like, and him, like, what's the name? They had him and Momoa like super ripped for those roles, and that's where it was unnecessary.
Even
like,
it's funny about Super Rip Aquaman is that in most of the comics, Aquaman gets his ass kicked half the time, and he needs the Justice League to come in and help. And there's only a few times where they actually reveal that Aquaman can engage in fisticuffs with Superman and hold his own. He's got a tough character.
Yeah, they
I mean, I know why they chose Momoa because he's like, eye candy, but he's actually like not really. He's more like Aquaman's dad in terms of like physique. Arthur's not supposed to be that big.
Well, they definitely have gone through multiple iterations because at one point they like had him, his hand got cut off and it was like a harpoon.
Oh yeah.
And then they retcon that, and so there's all these things because Aquaman, yeah, he's been a terrible character most of the time. So I do think when they brought in Momoa, like it was meant to be like, here, this guy's cool, but they really wasted the perfect Lobo.
Oh man, that's I 100% agree. He would have been a great Lobo. I bet.
I'm not against recasting him as Lobo in the same universe, but they fucking wasted him on Aquaman when they could have had like, they should have had somebody else as Aquaman. Really.
They could have had him like, they could have just gotten him like, reasonably drunk, and he could have just talked shit, and he would have been a good Lobo.
Oh yeah.
They wouldn't even have to give him lines.
Lobo.
They're just like, okay, these are the characters in the scene with you. You're Lobo. Here, drink this and just talk shit to these guys. They've got lines, so let them talk, but you can cut them off. He would have been great at that.
Yeah, man. That's like one of the biggest missed opportunities because I feel like they're not gonna do Lobo because you have to do that character right. Otherwise, it's just a waste and it's niche. But if they would have had him as Lobo, that shit would have made $1 billion fucking dollars, man.
Yeah.
In the same way that Deadpool with Ryan Reynolds.
Wait, like, is Michael Bay's Lobo officially done?
Wait, what?
It was like in 2019. They were talking about developing Lobo.
I had no idea that was even being discussed. No.
It was a Michael Bay directed Lobo film was announced in February of 2018 after Wonder Woman, and it just kind of disappeared. Like I just casually searched for a Lobo movie, and it's like one of the top hits. It's like, wait a second, how did I miss this?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I hadn't.
Huh. Indeed. They wanted Vin Diesel to do it. Oh, Vin Diesel wants to play Lobo.
No. Bro, he's got no hair, man.
That's true. Lobo is like really vain.
You can't do that.
Yeah, Lobo's
like,
vain. He loves
Diesel,
his hair.
Great actor. Great bloodshot. Slept on film. Don't pay for it. Just pirate that shit, and you won't feel like he got ripped off. That said, Vin Diesel cannot play Lobo because he's bald. No. We need someone with a full head of hair that we know is not a fucking hairpiece. You just have to, man. I don't give a fuck. There's this element of like that part. I'd rather have Lenny Kravitz play Lobo than Vin Diesel.
Dude, Lenny Kravitz would be great as Lobo.
He would. I mean, he could just as well. Like, that's probably why him and Jason Momoa get along, because they could both be Lobo equally. Like, on the same, in multiverses, like they're both equally Lobo.
Yeah.
And that's kind of that's why they can't hate each other. Like, you can't hate another Lobo. And that's why you can't get mad for Vin Diesel wanting to be a Lobo, but he's not Lobo, bro. Like, no, dude. Lobo does not have a hairpiece. Not in this universe. I'm not allowing it.
It sucks that in the cartoon movies, cartoons, they've always made Lobo into this, like, kind of bumbling anti-hero who kind of gets it done, but I feel like he's not a fuck up.
He's not a kid's character. And
No.
That's kind of when you start bringing people like, that's when you end up with Victor Zsasz in the Batman animated series not murdering anybody. Like, what is Victor Zsasz if he's not murdering? Just a dude with a bunch of self-inflicted scratch marks. It's like weird when people try to include characters that are not meant for kids storylines into kids stuff. Because then you're like, why are you putting this character in? There's 1,000 other characters you could include. Why are you putting Lobo in a kid's story?
Man,
my mom wouldn't let me buy Lobo comics when I was a kid.
there's still hope that Lobo could join Justice League movies. I mean, if they make more of them, there's still an opportunity to inject Lobo into that story.
Well, when they did that Man of Tomorrow animated story or animated film, that definitely sets up something that could happen.
Yeah.
On film or in live action.
They don't have to make him a bad guy. They can just make him like a dude who takes what he wants and occasionally kicks other people's asses. And those people's asses might be good guys because they get their way, or they could be the actual big bad of the story.
Well, he's a bounty hunter, so I think that's why it's kind of natural to have him hunt somebody.
Yeah.
On the first introduction, because that's what they did on Krypton.
Yeah.
That was
God, his character in Krypton was so much fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
They blew him in half, and
yeah. He blew himself up to get through the fucking barrier.
Yeah.
It's like all this crazy shit where you're like, oh, this is what Lobo would be like in live action.
Yeah.
So
I really wish that they'd done more with Krypton. I thought that was a good show.
Mm-hmm.
And Brainiac wasn't overpowered yet.
Yep.
Brainiac was a really good nemesis in that storyline.
Yeah. Well, in Doomsday too, I didn't know what to think when I saw the previews, and when I started it, I was glad I did, just because it's a different take on Krypton, obviously. But the story is actually interesting in itself. You don't need Kal-El to have an interesting Kryptonian story. And it makes it a lot easier to get away from Kal-El.
Yeah.
Because even, obviously Kara is his cousin, is still, it's all in the same family usually, but they definitely give you a window into other things. So it was like, for a side story, it was definitely worth watching if you like comic book TV shows or whatever.
Yeah. No, I think the thing that was most interesting to me about it was the way they envisioned Krypton. How it was barren, in a state of recovery from years of exploiting the planet and infighting, and just a star that was not providing enough energy, and a dying planet. The whole premise, the society that emerges from all of that chaos. And then they show the vast disparity between people on the ground and people who live high up in the towers. I thought that stuff was actually very clever, because it created this story universe where you don't actually like the people from Krypton. Like most of them are actually really despicable, easy to despise characters, and that actually made me appreciate Clark that much more.
Oh yeah, for sure. And it makes you appreciate the Kryptonian history even more because it shows why they're doomed. Because you're like, well, what about all their technology? Where's this gap? And you get to understand why they had all that tech, but then we're still doomed for their planet to blow up.
Yeah. Can't use technology to undo the damage of that same technology. It's the same way that we can't use our economic system to undo the damage that our economic system creates. It's like a vicious cycle. The only way we can get enough hamburgers is to invade beef Mexico. But it costs twice as many hamburgers to do that than it does to not do that.
Well, and this is where the impossible meats and the replicators come in for the people who actually want sustainable solutions. Because that's where I'm like, I got impossible meats in my freezer right now, and that shit tastes exactly like real meat. And I'm gonna keep encouraging them to advance their technology by supporting them because I want a sustainable option to eat meat when it's not possible for fucking cows to graze because people are too dumb to not roll back the shit that causes climate change. And that's what I'm like, it's a small step, but you know, the more we make steps towards sustainable solutions, the more sustainable our lives become. And I think it's funny how easy it actually is to like transition to a sustainable lifestyle. People make it seem like it's super difficult, but it's like you don't even really lose any convenience in a lot of cases. You just have to find how to do some sustainable shit that's then eco-friendly. That's like what you're trying to do. It just takes a little bit of effort to be eco-friendly and sustainable in 2020.
Imagine the kind of brainwashing somebody would have to go through to believe that we've got to maintain these practices so that trickle-down economics can maintain itself.
Right.
Like,
bro, we get our groceries delivered now, and it's like not only because it's products that are supposedly like not the best looking, so you're getting stuff that's discarded in the first place, so you get it at a discount and it's delivered to your door, and that's actually like cutting down on how many people are traveling on the road in the process. And it's like, bro, why wouldn't you want to do that? I mean, not to say that you can get everything that way, but there's so many ways to make your shit more sustainable, and in the process you don't have to deal with people who don't wear masks or like are trying to put your life at risk because they don't want to cover up. And like, the more I can be sustainable without having to interact with dumbasses, the less stress my life has in it. It's crazy.
You know, I think that's been the theme for me this past week. Is my life has become less stressful because my hobbies keep me, minding my own business. And my life is less stressful because I'm not hanging out on Facebook as much. And my life is less stressful because I'm reading more. And not just that, but reading more of what I want to read. And my life is less stressful because I'm not worrying about some shit that's invisible to me. Like, I'm aware that these things happen, but I don't see it. And maybe that makes me a dick to someone who, whatever that cause that I'm aware of that's become invisible to me, that no longer seems to exist to me. But, this pandemic is exhausting. I just feel bad for people who their hobby was being a consumer, and now they can't be a consumer because my hobby doesn't rely on that.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos Show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.